Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, now streaming on Roku TV. So it's really Roku TV's World Edition. And I'm proud to be here with my team today on World Edition, our show. We greet you from anywhere around the world, and I greet you live today from the All America city of Morrisville in the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States of America. And on our show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, and now continue our discussion of the never-ending or the very concerning war in Ukraine, and also as we approach a new phase of the pandemic. Today, my monologue, before I begin, I want to wish everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day is a wonderful holiday. We hope you're wearing green, and later in the show, I'll talk about who was St. Patrick and why we celebrate it and its significance. But please go to a pub today, wherever you are. Enjoy St. Patrick's Day, and I've got a bright green shirt I'm going to wear to my next event when I go to my office today. Now, let's get started. Here's my monologue, which I was going to mention yesterday. It's about whether we will ever have peace in the Ukraine. It doesn't really seem like it right now. It's been very clear that Vladimir Putin, similar to Chechnya and Syria, is willing to go at any length possible, killing as many civilians as possible in order to bring Ukraine back into Russia. I have said, and I have always said, that this is about imperial Russia. It's not only about gas and political control and economic control of the region in Europe, but it's about his ability and willingness to go at any measure as a dictator to bring back the Ukraine. Now, he did this in Chechnya and Syria. He attacked the Crimea. We've seen him kill journalists, human rights activists, political opponents. He's murdered them. He is a tyrant. He's maniacal, and he's awful for the world. The only hope for the United States and the West is to basically hope that he breaks down, that eventually the cost of the war would be too much for him to save face, and that he perhaps even could be ousted from power, which does happen when leaders carry themselves too far in these kinds of situations. Now, at the end of the day, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen by just expecting Putin to be out of power. There is a narrow corridor, as Fareed Zakaria says, for diplomacy, a narrow corridor perhaps with Putin in power, where, in my opinion, Ukraine could achieve peace. We know the sanctions have been more aggressive than we've ever seen. Banks are freezing assets, cash is drying up. If I were in Russia today, couldn't buy a Coca-Cola, couldn't buy a McDonald's French fries, couldn't buy a Pepsi on my Visa card, or even a Starbucks, because they wouldn't even recognize the card, and those companies have pulled out. And also, weapons are important, but we're not willing to send soldiers at this point, because I think the unspoken truth is that many of the allies, including the U.S., do not want to lose our own soldiers. But President Biden did announce $800 million worth of ammunition sent to President Zelensky in Ukraine. So at the end of the day, as I close my monologue, what could a deal look like? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, there's been some talk about Russia acquiring part of eastern Ukraine, Ukraine agreeing to not be a part of NATO. And, basically Russia would compensate them for the damage, and that the capital of Ukraine would no longer be Kyiv. It would be in the western part of the country. And so there is a narrow corridor of diplomacy. The question becomes, at what point will this war cost Putin too much? Not only in lives lost, but in his credibility on the world stage. The Russian economy, which is headed already to be an everlasting disaster for the Russian people. Only time will tell. But we hope that the West can unite together to rid the world of this dictator once and for all. Now, let's get started. We have with us today Mark Lee, my producer.
Glad to be here. We've also got Chris Greco here with us, and I think Shaquille may be joining us also. So we're going to bring Chris up and all of that. I'm sure he's got some comments on what's going on there in the war and all of that. And hopefully Sasha will be joining us, and definitely Shaquille as well. I do have to tease both of y'all, though, because I think I saw a little green leprechaun running around in the apartment earlier and all of that, because it is St. Patrick's Day, and we do know that they come out on this particular day. So I think I saw one running around. He's very small. I was trying to catch him so I could get that gold. So I'm having no luck catching him. He seems to be very fast. So maybe you could help me, Chris.
That's all yours, man. I don't have. Sorry, the only thing I have is a lot of pasta. You know what I mean? If he wants pasta, he can have pasta.
Understood. Well, like I said, I was trying to catch the little green man, and he was not having any luck. But we'll get to some more serious news. I just could not resist after he opened up with the St. Pat's, and yes, I do have some green on, and of course, where the green is, that is nobody's business, and all of that, unless they happen to be a lady friend or something along those lines. But I am wearing some green, so there is some green somewhere. We'll just leave it at that, and all along those lines. But definitely, there is some things going on with the Ukrainian war. There was even a New York City man that apparently earlier today, or not that long ago, was actually, we sometimes talk about flags, and he was unfurling a flag from a breakaway pro-Putin Ukrainian city, and definitely he was called a effing Russian, and apparently he was punched in the face in what New York Police Department are calling a hate crime fueled by the ongoing war overseas. And it was a 29-year-old victim who was apparently opening up a package near 23rd and Benson up there in that New York area and all of that. So we do see that it is definitely folks are very passionate about what is going on in this war, and definitely they are reacting when they find people that they feel are being pro-Putin and all along those lines. And other news in that sense is Russian activists and journalists are being targeted after Putin has called for a purge of what he is saying is traitors to his country and all along those lines. So he definitely put that out there. And matter of fact, Russian activists and journalists have discovered threatening messages painted on their apartment doors after Putin delivered a speech calling for a self-cleansing of society from scums and traitors. And definitely some people are putting some very nasty thoughts out there in that part of the world and all along.
The only other updates I have before we get into my conversation of the peace, because I really want to focus in on that today with Chris Greco and you and the others. But let's just remember that President Biden has called him a war criminal now. The $800 million in military aid will be high defensive weapons that require little training to use. More than 7,000 Russian soldiers have died, according to our estimates. That's greater than the number of American troops killed in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. And we're going to get into some domestic issues, but the war is entering its fourth week. And, I do believe President Zelensky did ask, he basically just pleaded with the Congress and the American people to really help. I can't, I'll try to find the words. Let me see what he told the president real quick. He asked the Congress to, let's see, what did he say? His quote was, there was a really good quote.
Are you looking for that quote? Why are you looking for that quote and everything? I did see that the Crimea, which we have also mentioned before as well, because that is another part of the world that has been invaded by Russia in the past. But the Crimean Tatars are fearful as Russia invades the Ukraine. And definitely that is something that we're also seeing, because some of them are living in Russian-occupied Crimea and on the Ukrainian mainland, and they feel particularly threatened by their historic enemy's latest invasion. Some have vowed to defend Ukraine, a land many fled in 2014 after Putin's forces invaded the Crimean Peninsula and began to repress the local Crimean Tatars. So, Greco, I know that you've got some thoughts about that, because I think you've even had some feelings. I don't know if you had anything that you want to add to that.
I couldn't find the quote, but the bottom line is he's just pleading with the American people and the President of the United States to really, this is a quest for freedom and democracy, and that he seems very resilient and very confident that they can win. I'm starting to feel more confident just based on the strength of the Ukrainians and how hard this is war for Russia. But Chris, what are your answers to Mark's questions and my thoughts about this narrow corridor of what a peace or independent Ukraine could look like?
Well, I'll tell you, just doing some research on Putin and also on the Soviet Union. And, it's really funny to watch how basically what's going to happen is this is my opinion, is that, Putin is going to sit back and he's going to go, something, we'll just go down, Kiev is there, we'll take that river, we'll split Ukraine in two. And Ukraine, free Ukraine can be on the west and the other Ukraine can be on the east. And we'll just wait, we'll sit back and, we'll have an armistice line. And all I can think of is East and West Germany. And, I traveled through there. I traveled through West Germany. I traveled from Frankfurt to Berlin. And when I traveled from Frankfurt to Berlin, we could not go by plane. We had to go by troop train. And that troop train, you had to wear a uniform, number one. Two is you had to have your curtains closed the entire time you went through East Germany. You could not have your curtains open at any time. In fact, if your curtain was open, the East Germans could shoot through that window. So you had to have your curtains closed, and you traveled through. And every so often, we'd turn our lights off, and we kind of peek through the curtain, and you could see the East German soldiers that would patrol along each stop in the East German area. And one of the guys was one of the service people were an expert on that, and they said, "You see the boots that they have on?" And I said, "Yeah, they look like leather boots." He says, "Those aren't leather boots." He said, "Those soldiers are freezing." He said, "It was wintertime when we went through." And then we went to West Berlin, and we saw East Berlin. And I'll tell you, this is the way the Soviets treated basically conquered territories. Is they never built anything, they never improved anything. It was horrible. I mean, just the buildings. You could see West Berlin was just nice buildings and nice areas and prosperous, and East Berlin was just a trash heap. It was just horrible. And I think that's what Putin's going to do to East Ukraine or whatever Ukraine is. He's going to treat them like freaking just like slaves. And it's going to be a horrible situation for them if they come to that conclusion. So I hope that is not what they're going to do. I hope the Ukrainians say, no, we're not going to split this country in two. We're going to be whole Ukraine, and this is what we're going to fight for. And hopefully we'll be able to support that from the U.S. side. But all this, I'm sorry, it's bullcrap to me. Whenever you talk about, oh yeah, he's a criminal, he's a war criminal, this and that, that's all optics and bullcrap. Yeah, the only thing, what does that do? It puts out an arrest warrant for Putin with Interpol. So what? I mean, this guy is just going to sit back in Moscow and he's going to just kill thousands and thousands of people, and he's not going to care. He doesn't care now.
But let's go to
Can I say something? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Sasha, sorry, do you mind, Sasha? I'm just going to jump in because obviously you're more of an expert in the area. So I'm going to give you my uninformed view before you actually tell us some more truthful and accurate things. So somebody on LinkedIn, Gary, I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, Raggio, has made a comment. I'm just going to bring this up on our screen.
Yeah, please do.
And, I'm assuming, Gary, that you're from the Ukraine and that's what you're referring to. I'm not sure what LUTCF stands for. As somebody from finance, that's normally something to do with life insurance underwriters, but it could be something else. Please do correct me, Gary, if I'm wrong. But I think that's a really important point here. We can all sit there and say we love Putin, we hate Putin, whatever. What difference does it make? The bottom line is that one nation has deliberately invaded another. They have circumvented the sovereignty of another nation. And that is completely unacceptable. It's not something that should be tolerated at all. And for pretty much every country in the world, but most especially the Western countries, to say, this is awful, we're on Ukrainian side, we're going to, wear the Ukrainian flag on our suit, we're going to, tell you all that we're going to support Ukraine, we're going to, we love Ukrainians, oh, this is terrible. Well, what are we going to do about it? Oh, we're not going to do anything about it. We'll put a couple of sanctions on, but we're not actually going to do anything. We're going to tell Poland not to send the MiGs over. we in the West are going to stand by and watch while we all say that this was wrong, and all we're going to do is say that Putin's a terrible person. That's pathetic. And I think that, we owe it not just to the people in the Ukraine, but we owe it to all the other people around the world that, hope that we'll stand up for them. We owe them a little bit more than this, I think. And get out of our country. If I was Ukrainian, or if I was like Sasha, who was from Ukraine and now lives in another country, and I saw this happening, I'd be saying, get the hell out. Stop it. That's how I'd feel if something went down in Fiji, which I've never lived in. I wasn't born there, but my family are from there. And if I saw, I don't know, Singapore, country I love, go into Fiji and try and take over the place, I'd say, hey, get out. This isn't right. So, yeah, you're right. I don't think we're doing enough. And I think that this sort of, what if we upset Putin? I mean, what? I really think that's terrible. Sasha.
Well, I was born in Ukraine, and city of Odessa, we always had a special day, which was April 10th. What's happened on that day in 1944? Odessa was liberated from German occupants. Now, and we celebrated like every year, even like I left Odessa, I moved to Canada a long time ago. And today, there is a real threat that Odessa will be occupied by Russian fascists. And Russian fascists are much worse than German fascists, because at least Germans were civilized people, and the dirty work, they wanted always to mobilize the local people, and they were paying them and they were encouraging them to do the dirty job, because they believed that even when they were exterminating Jews, they believed that it's below status of the German soldiers, and other people have to do the job. Russian people, they're doing the dirtiest job of killing innocent civilians and children themselves. They're not mobilizing Chinese or the Syrians or anybody else. They are doing that themselves. And Putin, if he's not war criminal, then who he is? He's destroying buildings. See, they cannot move any farther anymore. They got stuck there. They will never get out of Ukraine. All of them will be killed, eliminated, tortured. That's what is awaiting them. If at first Ukrainians were taken over, well, you didn't know where you're going. You were told that you are going for training exercises or so on. Now everybody knows where they were going. So that no longer is an excuse. So therefore, they will be punished severely. And I'll tell you, the NATO, which is good for nothing, really. They cannot fight Russian army. Ukrainians can. NATO cannot do. The NATO can fight Afghanistan, Iraq, Grenada, maybe a few other islands or so on. That's what they are. They're no good for nothing, really. It's not that Ukraine needs NATO. No, it's NATO who needs Ukraine. NATO need people with a big heart who are fighting for their motherland, and they can defeat the army, which supposedly very recently they were considered one of the best army in the world, maybe the best. Ukrainians exposed to what the bullshit it is. They are one of the worst armies in the world. They don't know how to fight. The generals are being killed. They already lost so many planes and vehicles. Already 4 generals were being killed. What a stupid army which allow 4 generals in a matter of few days being killed. That's what Russia and Putin, but not only Putin, all country, all people will be responsible for what happened. They're working there, they're paying taxes, and Putin using this money to unleash a war machine, unleash extermination of innocent people. So don't tell me that all those Russians are against the war, and these Russians are say that they disagree or so. I don't buy that stuff. I don't need that stuff. All of them will be responsible, and I'm glad that what's happening right now, that Russia is being completely taken out of the world society.
Sasha, I'd like to ask you
Yeah,
a question.
Sasha,
Hang on,
Shaquille,
I'd like
I
to
just had a
ask
quick question to ask about another group that I just wanted Sasha's opinion
I
of
wanted to ask
and
you a question,
everything really
Greg.
quickly, which is when we think about people that have definitely gone through a lot, and you've actually mentioned them before, because I do know that Crimea, which I mentioned earlier, has got a lot of folks that are defending or are worried about what is happening as well. And apparently the Crimeans have gone through a lot of very brutal wars, including the ones with Stalin and the ones way back in history against Genghis Khan and some of his relatives that were led by that whole area of Mongols and all of that. But I was just wondering your take on the Crimean people and their kind of like thoughts around the war, because it sounds like they've been also a group of folks that have been very resilient in their ability to withstand a lot of suppression and things of that nature. But I've never lived in the Ukraine, so I don't know any Crimeans personally that I'm aware of. But I'd love to hear your take on the Crimean Tatars and some of the things that they've gone through historically.
Yeah, they have a terrible history, especially in Stalin's time. A lot of them were being displaced, sent to Siberia. They were dying on their way to Siberia. They were tortured in inhumane conditions in Siberia. Then, when Stalin died in 1953, some of them were permitted to resettle back to Crimea, which they did. It's They really don't have any industries to speak of, but they have a fantastic climate, and they have different sanatoriums, hotels, and so on. So tourist industry is quite decent there, obviously before 2014. And by the way, Russians were always welcome in Crimea. They didn't need visas. They could just get the flight and just fly there a couple of hours away from Moscow, and they could enjoy themselves there, which they did before 2014. From 2014, it's been nothing but hell.
Absolutely.
And it's still there now.
I agree. Real quickly, I agree with Sasha with everything that you said, Sasha. And I think that it's just atrocious, and that this guy, I think, should be treated as a war criminal. I think he should be executed or hung by the international tribunals or put in prison for the rest of his life. I don't know what can we do, but I know that the Nazis were all taken out. Hitler eventually killed himself, but I just feel like that's just my personal feeling. He's a tyrant. He's a maniac. He needs to be taken out. He's a disgrace to the world. And, I hope somebody, it's a terrible thing to say, but I really do hope that he is shot down and killed in the next couple months.
Steve, have you been watching Sean Hannity on Fox? Because that's what he's calling for, an assassination.
Yeah, Sasha,
can I just ask you a quick question
yes, go ahead.
about things here? So, for me as a person, especially when it comes to issues that I'm not an expert in, that I don't fully understand, I always try to get both sides, what's the pros, what's the cons, and even most especially probably for the people that I don't agree with, I always try to understand what they're thinking and what they're saying, that sort of stuff. And you said something very interesting to me to the show yesterday. You said that a lot of Russians that have left Russia, that live in Canada or live in the US, listen to Russian media. They've fallen for the propaganda. They make, the Russian propaganda machine makes girls look like a schoolboy, I think was what you said. I'm just curious, without attacking Russians, I'm just curious, what in the mind of Russians is the justification for this? What are they saying? Obviously they think this is great, according to what you said yesterday. Why do they think this is good? Why do they think that this is a positive thing? Why do they think that, hey, we should be going into the Ukraine? What's their justification for it?
Shaquille, thank you for a great question. I'll tell you that I do have I can't say friendship. it's impossible. But at least line of communication, so we can call occasionally each other. Some of these people who are victims of Russian propaganda. Now, how it works? At some point, they were subscribing to Russian channel, the first channel, because maybe they didn't know English well enough, and Russian was easier for them to understand. But now, recently, what's going to happen is what's happening that Russian propaganda and their view on everything what's happening in the world becoming so different, and not only different, but absolutely opposite of what we learn from Western media. It doesn't matter CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, just any normal channel. We just I like CNN. They don't do that. It used to be many years ago. They had a program, maybe for 10 minutes, no words or no comments, I don't remember. And they would show just picture of what's happening somewhere around the world without any comments. I think this is a very, very good idea. So you don't put your commentaries, whether you're liberal or Republican or something like that. You just see it for yourself. That's it.
But what you said, what's their reason for thinking this?
Hold on, I'm coming to that. Because now there is so much difference and exactly opposite of what normal channels, like I mentioned, they show and talk about in their programs, and Russian channel 1. So these people cannot, now that they even know English well enough or so on, but because of that, because it contradicts 100% what they see on Russian channel 1, they just stop watching any television, period. No CNN, no Fox News, nothing, absolutely just. So 100% of their time, what they're spending, it's a Russian channel 1.
Mark, I just want to
ask one of the people recently, the city of Kharkov, its second largest city, was completely destroyed. 95% of the population of Kharkiv, they speak Russian. And they are ethnic Russians as well, although the Ukrainian.
They do speak.
So, the question is, if Putin believes that Russian and Ukrainian people is essentially the same nation, the same people, and they speak the same language, so how Lavrov was asked, how then you are destroying your city where all people speak Russian? Lavrov said, it's not us. It's Ukrainian did that. They are bombing their own city. How then you can accept Russia as a member of world community, deal with them, talk to them? They have to be ostracized. I'm so happy that Magnus Carlsen is holding a very substantial chess tournament, and there will be no Russian players.
No, but well, guys, I just want to give a final thought, and I will be seeing you guys next Monday. I got my first post-COVID trip to New York City. I'm a little bit nervous. I haven't been on an airplane in 2.5 years. So I'll be out for a few days, but I'll be back next Wednesday. So I want to hand it over to Mark Lee. Real quickly, I wanted to just wish everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day. Please talk about the Fed. If Shaquille Latimer could take the lead on, or the economist on the show talking about the U.S. raising the Fed by a quarter of, I think just a fraction. And I want to end with just some power women I want to share with the audience. Trailblazer Women, as we celebrate Women's History Month. It's also AmeriCorps Week. There's so many different weeks. But Geisha Williams is the first Latina CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Barbara Walters, the first woman to co-anchor a network evening news program. Catherine Sullivan, the first American woman to walk in space. Catherine Smith, the first woman to become a full-time coach in the NFL. Lori Robinson, the first woman to lead a top-tier U.S. combat command. Mae Jemison, the first woman of color in space. And Ann Dunwoody, the first female 4-star general. So we want to thank those women trailblazers for doing everything they can to change the world. And I'll share some few more next week as we end it out. But from our family to yours, thank you, Mark. See you in a few. Be safe.
No problem. We'll keep it rolling and all along those lines. I did have a quick thing that I was going to bring up really quickly, which is
Mark,
actually something
sorry,
that I know that
Mark, sorry, I was
Chris would
still
love as well. And then I'm
session.
going to toss it back to Shaquille about some of the economics, but I'm sure that Chris will love this because I did see that a Russian lawmaker recently, I think it was actually over the weekend, has brought up the idea of us returning Alaska. So yes, a Russian parliament member has called for the return of Alaska to Russians. And of course, that just was a quick dismissal from the Alaska politicians and others. But yeah, there's been a whole conversation around some of the things that exist in America and coming back in. They're even using words like reparations. So they're saying, let's think about reparations. The harm these sanctions caused us, cost money, return of possessions, including possession of the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and even parts of Russia that are now occupied by the United States, is what this parliament member Oleg Matveyevich said, and all of that. So he said that in an interview, and that was when somebody asked him about the return of Alaska and Fort Ross. I'm not sure where Fort Ross is, but maybe you can explain to me
Fort
why
Ross
they
is
were even
out in the Aleutians. But I mean,
can I just come back? Sorry,
go
can
ahead.
I come back to Sasha again for a second? Sorry, because I
go, man.
I don't think you quite answered quite what I was asking there, Sasha. So it's very easy, I think, for most of us in the West to look at the Ukraine and say this is absolutely wrong. Russia should not have gone in there. They should not have invaded another country, but et cetera, like all the reasons that we have for why Russia shouldn't have done it. But in the minds of the people who are Russian, why do they think that they should have done it? Like, what's their rationale for this? Do they think that the Ukraine should be part of them? Like, do they think it's justified? Do they think that killing the deaths in the Ukraine justify what they're trying to achieve? Like, what is their kind of reasoning to justify why they're in there, why their country's in there?
Who would ever ask Russian people what is their mind?
Because you made the comment, but Sasha, the reason why I've asked you that is because you made the comment yesterday that you've got friends of yours that you know, or people that you know who are Russian that have lived outside of Russia for many, many years who support this. And I was just wondering if you knew why they supported it. What's their rationale behind supporting it? If you don't know, that's fair enough. But
wait a moment. I just 5 minutes ago explained exactly why they support Russia and Putin, because they've been poisoned by absolutely incredible propaganda, which makes Dr. Goebbels like an innocent child. They are bombarding people who takes care of listening to that. Absolutely incredible lies, outright lies, and more lies, and the people are exposed to that, especially when they're making choice and reasonable choice, not to listen to anything else. Because if you listen to anything else, you must say, oh, they must be lying, because I heard on Russian channel one that it's so and so and such and such. It's Ukrainians who are killing people in Kharkiv and many other places and so on. So that's why the opinion, the same people in Russia just as well. So this is why I'm talking about collective responsibility. Putin is war criminal, and Shoigu and all his ministers and so on. That goes without saying. But I'm going a little bit further than that. I'm saying that all nation is responsible, same as all Germans were responsible for atrocities of Second World War. And it took a generation to get new Germans, actually, who were already different, who were not poisoned by Hitler's propaganda and lies. So the new Germans, now it became a new nation. Today's Germans are very different people from those during the Second World War. And this is what's going to happen with Russia. Russia has to be isolated from the world community, period. Technology, finances, sport, just music, just anything out. We don't need you. Get cured.
Sasha, you made a great point. You made a great point at one point in time back whenever you said, that we never did. And I went back and I took a look. You're right. At that time when the wall came down, we should have met with the Russian leaders, the Soviet leaders at that point in time, and said, okay, we won the Cold War. So now we're going to have a treaty with you. We're going to sit down and we're going to have a treaty after the Cold War as to how basically the world is going to be. And you could have it with all the European leaders, whatever else, but just basically have this massive, committee type thing where it says, okay, this is how Russia is going to act. This is what it's going to do.
May I just offer you something? That
Sure,
all
go,
the
man.
treaties are signed when one side lost and another side won.
Yep.
Russians never recognized that they lost Cold War. They never publicly recognized. So why I believe that George Bush Sr. is the worst president in history. He never engraved in stone that Russia or Soviet Union or whatever, because Soviet Union already by early 92, there was no Soviet Union.
That's right.
So to say that you didn't lose war, but however, your country is not there anymore. So what's happened? If you didn't lose the war, where's your country? Oh, you lost your country. Did you lose the war or not? Say loud and clear. You lost or you didn't.
No,
you didn't lose the war. Get all your nuclear arms to us in next 72 hours. That's it. The time goes on. Go. Do it.
No, but Sasha, isn't part of the problem with that, and I'd love to hear Chris's ideas about that as well, is that a lot of the wars that we have talked about historically, whether it was some of the wars that you have alluded to, that what was going on with the Mongolians and Stalin, and even the World War II, World War I, Vietnam, a number of other wars were actual physical wars with military equipment and everything that was a lot of blood and guts that were involved in there, whereas the Cold War was more of a war of principles and a war of different styles, and there was not any true military exercises in the sense of what we usually think of as wars. So therefore it makes it harder to declare a victor in those kind of wars. So that's because that's why it was called the Cold War. It was a war of philosophies and and different styles of government. And I just think that those are harder to say that you lost that war, even though I agree. Then I definitely think that Russia and anybody else that was on their side lost the Cold War. But I just think that it's harder to declare it because there's none of these signing treaties, and there's no declarations of the end of the war the way that there was with the Civil War and other things. But if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Summed that up pretty well when he said that when you look at the sergeant's arrows on the shoulders and on military in place, they sort of form the phallic symbol, and really a lot of these conflicts are about who's got the biggest dick. It's about one leader trying to say, I've got a bigger one than the leader of the other country. And it's just, ego and male testosterone and aggression. And oftentimes that's what it is. It's I want to show that I'm better than you, and to hell with the consequences to my own people or to your people. And we all have to suffer as a result of this crap that we put up with in government and with our leaders.
And it's something that I think when you take a look at that, I agree with you in this area, Mark, is the fact that when we won World War II, it was at a terrible cost of the European continent. I mean, it was destroyed. It was basically there was no munitions, there was no manufacturing available to Europe at all. Yeah, U.S. manufacturing was pretty much untouched, but Europe was just in shambles. And I'll tell you what we did as a country is we started to say, let's rebuild. So we started to help Germany rebuild. We did not put a military government in Germany. We put a military government in Japan because we were scared about the fascism that was going on, the imperialism that was going on in Japan. But we didn't do that in Germany. And so all of a sudden we started rebuilding all this stuff, helping people rebuild. And all of a sudden it was like, you could see that on the Soviet side, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, they went in there and just, they didn't care. They treated them like they were defeated. Like all of a sudden, they were a defeated country. So they didn't do anything to them. They decided that they were going to be vengeful. And that to me was the Soviet philosophy is I'm going to revenge the people that we thought died as a result of fascism, And from now on, any time that we go into some place, we're just going to call it a fascist nation, and we're just going to go in there and take fascism because we don't want any, we don't want any more of our people killed. I mean, that's the rationale type thing.
No, and I hear you, definitely, Chris. And ironically, to come back to one of Shaquille's favorite topics that he says I bring up way too much, but if you talk to people that say that they want reparations or that they want some sort of money to come back to the minority community, particularly the African American community, that is actually one of the arguments that they will give you and everything. And I'm not saying that I necessarily say that I need to get a check as a light-skinned African American male, but one of the arguments, because I've been on shows with them and everything, that they will give you is that, hey, hold on a second. When we lost a war or when a country lost a war, you would give them money, meaning China, meaning Germany, not China, but meaning Japan, meaning Germany, meaning this and that, to rebuild themselves. But you wouldn't do it when we were the ones inflicted and had things that were caused against us in the sense of slavery. Because that's one of the arguments that they will give. They'll be like, hold on, you gave a bunch of money to the folks that were in from Japan and from Germany, and you also went and built those countries. Why didn't you do that with us and all of that? So that is one of those arguments that you will hear among the communities.
What I would say to you, Mark, on that is there's so much that we can go back to. We can say who was responsible. Was it the slave traders out of Africa? Was it slave traders out of Belgium? We can go through all sorts of different things with that. But in the Civil War, this was really a big point of contention between the Northern abolitionists and the Southern emancipists, right? The Southern emancipists that wanted to emancipate the slaves talked about reparations. The Northern abolitionists didn't. The Southerners lost. So, if that's the case, that the Northerners won and the Unionists won the war, you really have to take that out of the northern states, not the southern ones. But that's really besides the point, because the issue about reparations in the United States is about trying to it's about attempting to make whole an injury that's been caused to people of African American descent in the United States, predominantly those that have descended from the slaves. And that's not something that I think is a bad thing, to try to rectify the wrong of the past, especially if it is still something that is a problem today, which clearly in the United States it is. I don't think the United States is as racist as it makes itself out to be, but there is some things in the United States that are unique to the United States, which you don't see as much in other Western countries. It's not that I'm opposed to one thing or another as such. It's that I'm not sure that this is a practical way of solving the problem, right? And that's really what it is with most of the things that I disagree with. Often people on our shows and people in my life will say, oh, you're such a conservative. It's not that I'm a conservative because I disagree with the principle. It's I'm not sure the solution the solution being offered would actually achieve the desired outcome. And that's where I have a real issue. I think it's very easy to just sort of pay tribute to it. And if you were to just take one group of black people in one state and just say, here you go, guys, here's X amount of dollars for reparations, right? But you don't give them any way to actually improve their life. You just give them some money. That's not going to solve anything. That's just throwing money at the problem and saying, here you go.
No, I would agree. I would agree with you on. I would agree with you on that. And the other thing that I've heard said on both sides of that issue is, and it's even come up on the native side as well, is the whole question of proof, and also not just proof of the ethnicity, but also where do you stop the claims? Because actually, ironically, even though he was definitely in some people's mind at point of his life a separatist, Malcolm X would not qualify because Malcolm X's lineage is actually of the Caribbean descent. So there are some people that be like, wait a minute, because there are some folks that want it to be that you have to be able to prove that your family came from the slave lineage that you're talking about, and that is another conversation.
And then you also have the issue with, if a person is mixed race, what happens if a person is 1/4 and the 3/4? Well, I mean, these sorts of things would get very, very complicated. That's what I'm saying. I'm not sure that
may I address that issue by saying that when you're talking about reparation of to Ukrainians, there's much more important issue is that we see what happened, when happened, how happened. It's all documented. It's all there. There is no denial that cities were destroyed, the people's innocent civilians and children were killed. That's all there. However, if you're talking about German reparations, especially to Jews, it's also quite well documented. And there were two parts of reparation: one for the life lost, and then for the material things that were taken away and sent to Switzerland banks or so. And by the way, Switzerland banks pay enormous repatriation of funds to Israel because they actually help Germans to keep the stolen goods or so on. But if you're talking about now,
or because I thought it was good for their image to be seen to be handing money over to Israel, I tend to think that especially when it comes to corporations, banks, or otherwise, that they don't do things because it's the morally correct thing to do. They do things because they think it makes them look good.
I think they actually did very well, because what they showed is that they said we don't want to be perceived as the benefactors of stolen goods from killed people. No, we are not going to do that. So whatever they negotiated, $2 billion. I don't remember what was the amount, but it was paid. Now, talking about separation to African Americans. Let's analyze exactly what and when and how that happened. So to have, same as with the Ukrainian reparations, the data, the when, who, and so on, so we can put then some numbers. So how the first Black people were enslaved before they were brought to, first they were bringing them to Brazil, to Central America, not even to North America at all. Brazil was number one destination, and Caribbean countries number two. That's it. So, but they had to be enslaved before they would be put on a ship. So the African tribes, they were enslaving their own people. That's number one. Number two, when they were already enslaved, they were selling them to Portuguese traders. So the cycle now is complete. They were enslaved. Number one, they were sold as slaves already to Portuguese traders. Now, Portuguese traders, because they own the shipload of slaves, now they had to make some practical decisions, whether it's better to go to Brazil, maybe it's better to go to Central America, Caribbean, or somewhere to get better prices, and so on. So the evil against African Americans started right there by African tribes, so their own people who enslaved them, and then Portuguese traders who transported them and resold to either Brazil or the Central America countries and so on. And only in 1619, the first ship ever landed in Virginia, and there were 21 people on board. All of them, because of the Portuguese, they all had sort of Latin Christian names like Pedro, Maria, Antonio, or so on. And so when they offered to Americans who lived there in 1619, okay, we have some people abroad would like to have them, or so on. They were impressed. They were amazed. They took them all, and they lived with them as the members of their families. They were eating with them, they were working together, they are doing, and after a few years, 6, 7 years, these people told the slaves, you're free to go. You can go, you can do anything what you want. And they said, no, we don't want to go anywhere. We love to be with you. We love to live here, and so on. So they can.
Yeah, but Sasha, to be fair, Mark's going to fall over because I'm going to say something he needs defense. To be fair, if you've enslaved somebody, brought them to a new country, and then you say, "Look, you're free to go. You're not going to be able to survive out there on your own because we haven't given you any tools to be able to survive." But yeah, you're free. What sort of freedom is that? And I think, look, I agree with what you say because it's the stuff that I say. It's difficult to go back in time and attribute blame to one group or another, because all throughout human history, we've done some pretty terrible things to each other. And to some degree, we still do terrible things to each other today. But for people who feel as though they don't have the right, or they don't have the same sorts of opportunities as others in today's world, what can we do about it? that's something that I do think is fair and reasonable. I think that is something that we should strive for, is to have more equality of opportunity. And also, we need to pay attention, if we're going to pay attention to equality of opportunity, there has to be some attention paid to what is the actual quality of outcome, but not in a way where we're saying if we don't have equality of outcomes, there is a problem. We have to have a look at natural divergences and discrepancies that will naturally happen amongst any group of people. I just think that what's happening in the United States and also around the world doesn't actually, whilst they think that they're going to make a difference, it hasn't. And I don't think that what's being suggested will make a difference often. Right. I don't think, for example, critical race theory that we talk about, I don't think teaching that in school is actually going to have the desired effect. I think it's going to be counterproductive. That's why I get, that's why I get my back up a little bit about it, because I've seen these sorts of things happen and fail, and nobody ever says maybe that's the wrong way of doing it. What they instead say is it failed because of how racist America is, or how racist Australia is, or whatever the case is. And then the cycle just repeats. So I really think that if we're going to do something, we have to do something more than just saying one group's a victim, therefore let's give them special treatment and this and that. Right?
I agree, Shaquille. I think basically
you said that, and part of that, I love to hear what Chris got to say too. Yeah. But part of that is also understanding the history, and this is going to be probably one that knocks Sasha off, because we have to understand that slavery has been around for centuries, including being based even in the Slavic areas, which is actually where the word comes from, and all along those lines. So that is tied to slavery, including slavery in Europe, because there has definitely been slavery in Europe, and there's definitely been some slavery issues in Europe throughout its history. And sometimes it's the more traditional slavery, and sometimes it's that idea of indentured servants, which can be a form of slavery, or even some sharecropping kind of things that were happening as well here in the U.S. and all along those lines. Chris, I want to hear your thoughts. I also want to hear about, before we get out of here, your thoughts about Alaska and Stewart's Folly, because I know you were going to bring some of that up and everything, and I'd love to hear about that, since apparently the Russians want Alaska back.
So that's right. So basically, real quick, we tried reparations in World War I against Germany, $32 billion. You saw what happened with that. Basically Hitler came in, started the fascism movement, you talk about nationalism, big time nationalism, because they were being punished, right? So all of a sudden, and I hate to say it, but that's how I feel. If I feel I have to pay reparations, it feels like I'm being punished. My family had nothing to do with slavery. They were limestone mining over in Italy, right? My grandfather was brought over as an indentured servant to mine limestone in Utah. He was severely injured and basically said, "You're out of here." He went back to Italy, a hunchback. So, I mean, basically, the situation is that, if you want reparations, and this is what I agree with Shaquille, is if you're going to give reparations, screw the money. Here's what you give them. You give them the ability to get better social, benefits. So you sit back and you say, education. Instead of working at McDonald's and giving them $24 an hour, bullcrap on that. What you're going to do is you're going to sit there and say, look, we're going to give you free tuition to go to school into a major that you want to go into, or we'll give you help to go to a vacation school to learn about electrician. Asheville? What's that?
Have you been hanging around Asheville?
Is that what they
pretty
do?
much what Asheville has said they're going to do.
Go for it.
I don't agree with Chris. Sorry, I don't agree with Chris, because I've tried that here in Australia, where they've given our Indigenous people access to free education and better things. But the thing is, like, let's say, for example, the HSBUs in the United States, right? So what they've done is they've gone, okay, well, look, we're going to give people all these all this education. We're going to give this group, we're going to give them a special school just for them. We're going to put them in charge of it and all that sort of stuff, and they fail, or they take the very, very top, the very, very cream of the crop, and put them into Ivy League universities in order to hit a quota, right, without doing anything else about all the others. And look, let's just take Kamala Harris. Forget about whether I agree or don't agree with her politics and her policies. Let's just forget about that altogether. Just imagine if she actually does become the president because Joe Biden retires early or whatever, the 25th Amendment's invoked, whatever, okay? She becomes the president, let's just say hypothetically, and then she loses the election in 2 years' time. What great ideal is that? What great sort of idol is that for people to see the first woman of color become the president, not because she won an election, but because she was essentially appointed into that position because of the color of her skin, and then she doesn't win an election. You know, that's such that she's been, in my opinion, she's been set up to fail. People make fun of her because, you know, of how she's handled herself on the international stage in relation to her conversations in Poland and her conversations about the Ukraine. But she's not an expert on the Ukraine. No, you might as well send me over there. I'm not an expert either. So why is she put into these roles where she's not going to be successful? She is a very, very talented litigator. You put her into a role that she can't do very well. She ends up looking bad. And then the people, these rich white liberals go, well, look how good we are. We put somebody of color into government. You know,
Shaquille, just really quickly, I have to make two observations on that. One is that the part of the creation, I'm not saying the entire creation, because there was some other things to do with Reconstruction and a lot of other things from history that we can explore at a later date or later shows and everything. But part of the creation of the Black middle class was because of what you just described, because there was not enough people that were able to have the college education that they needed to have. So then that's why they created universities like North Carolina Central University, Fisk University, Tuskegee in Alabama, and a number of other universities that are considered HBCUs that developed the Black middle class that you are talking about and all of that. So that is part of how that Black middle class was created, was because they couldn't get into a UNC or a Duke at that particular time. So they created their own university system in order to build up that middle class.
Yeah, that's fine, Mark. That's fine. I don't 100% agree with that, but that's okay. Let's just say I do. That's fine. Okay. But, you know, 60, 70, 80 years later, if the complaint is that they still are faced with the same issues, that they're still struggling, that people, you know, the Black middle class, people are falling out of it within a couple of generations instead of more people coming into it, right? There's a problem. And I don't think that problem's being addressed. Now, I think there's a lot of people that want to address the problem, but they don't really want to get to the root causes and how to address it. They just want to do the easy thing. The easy thing is to say, we'll just throw small money at it. The easy thing to do is to say, you know what, we're going to make X percentage of our workforce people of color. That's the easy thing to do. But addressing, if it really is true that there is systemic racism, addressing the issues within the system doesn't fix it. And like you said yesterday, there's somebody who said, look, I'm about to retire from this role. Don't appoint another white person. Make sure it's a Black person. That's just
no, it's not a Black person. He asked for a white woman or a woman. He said that he wanted a woman in the position, and he didn't even say anything about the ethnicity. He said he wanted a woman because he did 10 white males in the job. It was an archivist.
So I said, all right. So I said a color rather than gender, but it's the same point, right? It doesn't help women to do that either. You know, it may help in the very beginning when people have been completely excluded because they weren't able to even enter the industries and enter schools and colleges, etc., in the first place. But if that problem still exists, then there's an underlying problem that needs to be addressed. And allowing the people at the very top to just go, yeah, we'll just do this, we'll just do that, it doesn't solve it. I'll just say
what you said. I hear what you said, Shaquille, and we've actually got to wind down. But I was going to bring up really quickly because there was the first ever. And you know, I know that you may not be excited about this, but I know a lot of people probably will be excited. But there was the first ever African to win a prestigious award for architecture. Basically, it's the Pritzker Prize, which they say is like the Nobel Prize of architecture. And a Burkina Faso, which is an African country, architect has won that award. And a lot of people are giving him a lot of praise for this because he's the first African to win this award. And there's a lot of people that are giving a lot of praise for this. And of course, he's saying he's the happiest man on the planet because he's got this award. He's actually not that far off of my age. He's 56, but his buildings that he's built are all over Africa, Europe, and the United States. And he talked about some of the things that he grew up in because that was a very poor country. And he definitely remembers some of the things that he had to go through in order to get out of that environment in order to become the successful architect that he is now. So I guess my question is
about that. Hang on, of course I'm excited. I think that's fantastic based on what you've just said. Based on solely what you've just said, I think that's absolutely fantastic. And of course I'm going to support support that and think that he should get some attention and some kudos. And, absolutely. Of course, I don't know why you think I wouldn't be.
But I just remember we've had conversations, including on this show, where, because we actually brought it up, I think it was either yesterday or the day before, about whether a gentleman like this should be seen as a role model for the rest of the people. I'm using Burkina Faso because that's where he's from, as a role model, because I know that we've had conversations about, whether people of different ethnicities or women, and even like Kamala or different other folks, should be role models. We heard Steve earlier give a whole litany of folks that have had first and everything. So
look, we're at the hour, but Mark, somebody who achieves something, who's the first person of their minority to be able to achieve it, should absolutely be celebrated for that. Of course they should. Especially if they are able to say, here are the challenges that I had to overcome to pave the way. Those people should be celebrated. A person who gets there, whose achievements are overshadowed by the majority who are in power, saying, we are only going to give this particular award to that ethnicity, that takes away that person's achievements, and in my opinion, and I feel like that what are we celebrating then? They weren't just the first person who happened to get there. They were the first person who happened to be picked by the people who have all the power, right? That's not what I want to be. I don't want to be somebody who's picked by the people in power because they kind of, had to. I want to be able to say, you know what, I did this. And for all the battles and challenges I've had in life, I did this, celebrate this. And that's why I'm saying.
No, I definitely can agree with what you're saying on that. And you're right, we're at the top of the hour. But the only thing I would add to that, and we may disagree or agree, and we can bring this up tomorrow and everything, is that if there is, and this comes back to the archivist from yesterday, if there is something that is totally out of proportion, and if you've had a job since whoever knows wins, kind of like when the Supreme Court justices were all white males and everything, wearing those little British wigs and everything, and then you want to shatter the good old boys network, I don't have a problem with that if that's what you're doing. And I think that's what he was encouraging, because that's
Mark,
people that are all in that.
Mark, if you hold that view sincerely, and we'll just forget about color for a second, because women got some rights before people of color did in around the world in the United States. If you hold that view sincerely, then you should be looking at who were the poorest people in America, who was the first one who wasn't part of the old sort of British aristocratic class, right? Who was the poorest person who actually made it on there? Why aren't you celebrating that person as well? Because remember, universal suffrage is one thing, but you didn't even have suffrage amongst men. It was only the very, very top of society that could vote, and all the poor men, they weren't able to. So what about the first white man who was poor that stood up and said, hey, what about that person? But we don't celebrate that. It's not just about appointing somebody and then saying, great, that's the first person. No, it's actually about whether or not there was a change made. And the person who fought and overcame the challenges and got there anyway, that's somebody I think that should be celebrated. Like Oprah Winfrey, whose politics I don't agree with for the most part, but she overcame some huge challenges in her era, and she's become a media mogul and very, very well respected. That's huge. All right. Of course, we should celebrate that. She wasn't picked for that role, for the roles that she had, because of the color of her skin. She was picked for it because of her tenacity, her business sense, her personality, etc.
Agreed on that and everything. I don't have any problem with us getting rid of overly aristocratic things as well. So there are some things that are overly aristocratic. And on that note, we'll get on out of here. We can have further conversations about that later on. But yeah, we can definitely get rid of some things that are overly aristocratic. But let's get on out of here, and we'll have some more engaging conversations on tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.